Great. Now let's talk about the second role of the column collection. And the second role is to control the recompute mechanism which affects the bind value and relations. So let's start with the theory. Columns that are not added to the columns collection will not participate in the recompute. So if you have a local column that you want to take part in the recompute, make sure to add it to the columns collection. Bind value will only recompute based on columns that were added before it to the column collection. Let's zoom in on that for a second. So in our controller, we have a simple controller with order date and everything you want to see on it. Let's go ahead and add a local column with a bind value of end of month of the order date, just for fun. So let's go ahead and add that local column. It's going to be a date column, and we'll call it end of month. End of month. Perfect. And we'll add it to our view. Just columns add. Yeah, don't forget to build before opening the column generator. Column wizard. Let's go ahead and select the end of month column and use these keys to move it to the left and place it after order date. Great. So if we run it like now, we will see that it has no value because we didn't put any value to it. Now let's go ahead and give it some values. So I'm going to say here that end of month bind value to orders.orderDate.end of month. Okay, I'm sending it a method that will return order date end of month. Let's run this. And we can see that it's working great. Perfect. Now let's go make some changes and see how those get affected. So if I change this from July to June, we can see that it recomputes. Perfect. Now let's review the column collection and their relative positions in it. So let's do Shift F12 and have a look at our columns collection. Now we can see that first to the column collection were added the order ID and customer ID. Then the primary key of the customers table was added automatically, and then the controls on the screen: order date, end of month, and ship via and ship name, based on their order on the screen. Now if we want to control this order manually, we'll first add them to our column collection. So let's go and do that. Let's add columns, add orders.orderDate, and columns add end of month. So by adding them manually over here, we'll see that now they are earlier in the columns collection. So first the order ID that we selected, customer ID, order date, end of month, the columns that we have selected, and then the primary column of the relation and the other controls on the screen. Great. Now, just to shorten the code a bit, instead of having columns add end of month and end of month byte value 2, you can write it like this. Columns add end of month and bind value to end of month. And this is the way the migrated code would look. You will see columns add and bind value in a single line. Great. Now let's play with that. Remember, our rule says that bind value will only recompute based on columns that were added before it in the columns collection. Okay? So that means that end of month will be evaluated correctly because order date is before it. Let's change their order. In Visual Studio, I can move lines by pressing Alt and arrow. So I'm going to say Alt, arrow up, and I can do that as many times as I want. But let's just play with the two. Let's say Alt, arrow up, and now end of month is before orders order date. Let's see what that would do to our recompute. So here we are on our screen, but now if we change this to be June, it will no longer recompute. It will only recompute once we leave and re-enter the row. And that is the designed behavior, because order date is after end of month in the columns collection, then when it changes, it doesn't affect the end of month. Now, how do we get that in debugging? How do we understand it? Because sometimes we have 100 fields. How do we figure out which one is which? So there's two ways to help that. One, we can look at end of month and see its end of month and see its underscore recompute path. In this case, it shows us the end of month doesn't have anything in its recompute path, which means it won't recompute based on anything else. If we'll reorder these columns and run it again, we'll be able to see that end of month has now one column in its recompute path, which is order date. Okay, so underscore recompute path is designed to help you figure out which columns change this column listens to. So this column listens to the order date change because it's before it in the columns collection. Great. Another way to view it, if you're looking at our columns, we have 7 columns over here. But we want to focus and see which one is order date, and let's say we are missing it in this list. We can right-click its value and say make object ID, and it will highlight it in our list. And that way we can see where they are relative to one another. I'll highlight end of month and also make, in again the debug window, right-click the value and say make object ID, and I will be able to see that they are both here, 1 and 2. And then I'll be able to relatively see them anywhere else. So I can look at order date and get the $1 at the sign, end of month and get the $1 sign at the end. So using the make object ID is very useful to recognize an object in the watch window. So to summarize this little topic, bind value will only recompute based on columns that were added before it in the columns collection, which basically means that if end of month is after order date, then this bind value will be calculated correctly. But if it's the other way around, if end of month is before order date, then it will not get calculated correctly. The recompute would not happen. And we can use end of month underscore recompute path to see which columns are in its recompute path, and also use the right click make object ID to monitor them.